A client is working with a coach to support them during an important career transition. The client currently holds a demanding role as chief operating officer of a company, while also raising 2 young children and serving as primary caretaker for their aging parents who live with the client. The client recently received job offers from 3 different companies, each requiring the client and their family to relocate. The client comes to the session excited about the new job opportunities and hopes to gain clarity through the session on which offer to choose. The client starts by discussing the things they're looking for in a new job, energetically listing opportunities for growth, challenging responsibilities, a talented team to lead, and the potential for travel. When the coach asks what the client's children and aging parents may need in a new community, the client's excited smile disappears and they are suddenly quiet. What should the coach do? Again, this is a super long one, so I'm like, okay, this person holds a lot of responsibility in company and in their family. They have a desire in this session to get clarity on which offer to choose and shift of emotions. So like, I'm just going to refresh it for myself so I have things to pin to as I read through the scenarios.
And I'm paying attention to when the coach asks what the client's children and aging parents may need in a new community. Somehow that's one of the first questions that I've seen where they're saying the coach has done something as part. So I want to pay attention to that also. Don't know where it's going to go, but catches my eye. Okay, so possible best options. Repeat the question to the client to give them another opportunity to respond to the coach's inquiry. Ask the client if they are okay to proceed with the session or if they need a break. Pause for a moment, then share with the client that they noticed a change in the client's energy. Ask if the client would like to explore what they are feeling in this moment. And then the last option, support the client in weighing the offers they have received by inviting the client to explore each of the characteristics they listed for a new job. So as I'm reading through all 4 of those, obviously you end with the 4th one. And so I have a tendency to kind of pay attention to how I feel about the 4th one. I notice that in the way that I read through, because it's freshest in my mind. And
Interesting bias there.
Yeah, and I didn't like it because it feels like it stays way in the person's head about all of these, decision-making processes. So immediately I'm kind of throwing that out as a best option. So that's what I'm noticing in my head as I'm thinking through. Then I also think about the energy piece. So if I'm looking for the best answer, it feels like this pause for a moment. I think the pause is really important because silence in coaching can be leveraged, and it's an important piece of listening. And notice the change. So I'm also thinking about the PCC markers in evaluating my responses. And one of the PCC markers talks about inquiring about emotion, inquiring about energy shifts. And so I'm liking that one quite a bit. There's a curiosity, like, would you like to explore this for a moment about the feelings, especially since they've been seemingly so matter of fact about making this decision analytically. That's where my heart goes. It feels the most human.
I'll also say, like, I didn't read this so much as matter of fact about them making the decision, so much as like they came in with excitement and then they had this big shift to not excited. So that's why with that one, I was immediately like, I would pick that as best. I have a really hard time with this one on what's the worst, because I had really strong reactions to this one. Reading 1 and 2, I was like, oh, I hate those. So repeat the question to give them another opportunity to respond. Ouch, that feels so like not tuned in. Ask the client if they're okay to proceed or if they need a break. That feels really weird. Honestly, the fourth one I don't feel as bad about because at least it's lined up with what the client said they want for the session. So that's where I'm like, I don't think I'm going to go to that one as one of the worst because of competency 3, but I'm not sure about that. First two, I think at least in the second one, they asked. And that's a kind of check-in. So in this instance, I'm going to say worst is number 1, but I don't feel confident about it.
I would agree with number 1.
Okay.
So don't love number 2.
All right. Best is number 3. Worst is number 1.
So as Jessica's been mentioning, feel free to share your comments, your questions, your curiosities, your what? And any questions about, or maybe suggestions that you're seeing about the competencies that could be contributing to ways that you would answer this. ICF competencies. Okay. All right, next to last here. Question 7, a coach is working with a client who is an experienced marathon runner writing a book on training for endurance races. This is a long-held dream for the client. The coach notices that the client often uses running metaphors when talking about their challenges and progress in their writing. The client is typically upbeat and energetic, but they arrive at today's session appearing tired and discouraged. They share with the coach that they have recently hit the wall in writing with 3 chapters remaining. When they sit down to write, the client says they can barely come up with anything and nothing that is worth publishing. The client says they're afraid they won't be able to complete the book on time and that all of their work towards this goal will be lost. What should the coach do? Right. So as I read that, I'm noticing the energy that is not normal for this client is very different. I'm also paying attention to the marathon theme, and that they actually say that the coaches notice that the client uses running metaphors when talking about challenges. So I'm thinking metaphor is going to be important. So those are a couple of things that I noticed just reading it.
Yeah, and then they end with this, they're afraid. So options in response. Ask the client if they would like to explore their fear of not finishing the book. Remind the client that they have achieved extremely challenging goals in the past and can meet this big goal too. Ask the client if there was a time when they were running a marathon and felt like they couldn't finish. Invite the client to share how they handled that challenge in the race. 4, support the client in identifying strategies to help them move forward in writing the remaining chapters of the book. Okay, so with this one, my mind is going next best thing because there are multiple things that could be okay. Ask the client if they'd like to explore their fear of not finishing the book. That seems fine as a thing to explore. It's exploring emotions. Remind the client they've achieved extremely challenging goals in the past and can meet this big goal too. That almost sounds like cheerleading, but not quite, because it seems like the coach is operating out of knowledge of the client. So there is that. Ask if there was a time when they were running a marathon and felt like they couldn't finish and invite them to share how they handled that challenge. I like that, given that they have enjoyed using running metaphors in the past. So it feels like operating off of what the client has given previously, and support them in identifying strategies to help them move forward. I wouldn't go with 4 in this because it doesn't feel like the next right thing. I'd probably choose between 1 and 3, and I think I'm going to go with 3 because it seems like the scenario is very metaphor themed, and I like it. So at this point, I'm like feeling the tiredness of working on this. And I'm like recognizing I'm going to make decisions too because I like them. And at a certain point, it's okay because I can trust my gut to know some things too.
So number 3 was my favorite also for best.
Okay.
I like it's in line with who the client is, how they think. It's their language, and you're working with their language, which is important.
This feels super tied into competency 6 and 7. And I think that's the best representation of options, particularly for competency 6 here, personally.
Okay, so we're both agreed clearly on the metaphor option. And then worst, ask the client if they'd like to explore their fear. That's not terribly out of line with coaching curiosity and exploring emotions. I'm torn on number 2 because it feels like if you were to make that comment, remind them that they've achieved extremely challenging goals in the past, they can meet this big one too. It's a bit of an acknowledgement based on who they know the client to be. So we know that 3 is off the table for worst, and then supporting the client, identifying strategies. That feels very dismissive to me, to just go straight to more strategies and the sort of the what as opposed to the who of the client. So this is tough.
Yeah, I'm feeling aligned with that too. Also, particularly because they've said like they've tried some things. So it feels like something needs to be explored first.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely not an easy one. All right, ready for the answers?
Sure.
Best is number 3.
Okay.
And worst is number 2. So we were both wrong on this, on worst.
No, I wasn't wrong. I was non-committal.
Oh, okay. I assumed you had committed to one, but here I am assuming.
No, I was kind of like, yeah.
And I can understand that one. So
Yeah.
and
Okay.
this partly is too like it's easy to overthink these.
Right. So I was really between 2 and 4. I couldn't decide. But this is a place where I would flag the question. So in the software, when you're taking the exam, there's a little button, little flag up at the top right. And you on that question, you can hit the flag button and come back. And I did have time to come back. Our last question here.
A coach has worked for 1 year with a client. The client has been identified by their supervisor as a potential leader in the organization based on their high quality work, good relations with peers, and innovative ideas for future projects. However, the client rarely speaks up in meetings with senior leaders, and when they do, they often downplay or diminish their ideas. The client's supervisor recommended coaching to improve the client's executive presence, with the ultimate goal of developing as a leader in the organization. At the start of coaching, the client was often self-critical. However, the client has made tremendous progress in recent months. During their closing session, the coach notices that the client has a confident, easy smile. When the coach shares their observation with the client responds by saying, "I feel different, empowered, ready to take on new challenges." The client adds, "And I was just nominated by the CEO to be part of a leadership development program for emerging leaders in the company." What should the coach do?
Any thoughts on what you gleaned?
Summary?
Long one.
Yeah. So one thing I noticed going through this was like, okay, this is a multiple parties situation. I just noted that in case it became an ethics thing, though I don't think that's really the most highly relevant thing here.
The thing that I noticed was it's a closing session. Okay, so let's just go ahead and look at the best lens from the best action. So acknowledge the client's growth and confidence over the last year and invite the client to share how they plan to celebrate their selection for the leadership development program. I like the acknowledgement. I like the celebration, especially given that it's a closing session.
I like the invitation.
Second option, invite the client to identify challenges they would like to take on next.
Feels a little dismissive.
It does, and you might, if you overthink it, you might think, well, yeah, you just keep going to the next thing. So ask the client what they may need to maintain their new confidence. I actually like that one better than the second one. The third one better than the second one. And then the fourth is suggest to the client that they extend their coaching engagement to work toward a new goal of being promoted to a leadership role. I want to throw up when I read that. Right.
Feels real directive.
Oh, right. And stay with me. And yes. Right. So I'm looking for best. I love number one in that it's an acknowledgement, there's an invitation, and it's appropriate. So I'm going back to that. It's the closing session with them. So that would be my thought for best.
I really loved that you called out the context of it being the closing session, because I hadn't remembered that when you said that. And I think had I not had that in mind, I would be more likely to maybe consider option 3. But I think given that it's the closing session, when I think about the competencies kind of spread out across the whole, I'm thinking about competency 8 and celebrating the progress. So definitely agree with that. And for worst, yeah, certainly the fourth, it doesn't feel ethical or collaborative.
Okay, so answer.
All right. We've got best is 1 and worst is 4. As we reflect on this, going through these, what observations, takeaways would you like to come back and highlight, Susan?
Follow your gut. Pay attention to your body. We talk a lot about neuroscience at the Academies, and we know that the brain is not just from here up. It's our entire body and the neuroception that we can leverage and pay attention to. So pay attention to gut. I also think pay attention to the values of coaching, the essence of coaching, the partnering of coaching, the holistic nature of we are working with whole people. Keep that in mind so that we give them options. So that's a piece. And listen to the context, like on that last question, especially, remembering that this is a closing session makes a big difference. So those are a couple of things immediately. I'm sure there's more, but what would you add?
I was just noticing where I started to get tired, and this is a long test. So noticing that was helpful because I could see the way it was impacting me to just be like, I'm just going to choose something. Or like on that last one, I wasn't noticing that it said in the closing session. So being able to be aware of that so that you can find ways to re-engage and focus is valuable. And then I'm just thinking about like when it comes down to choosing between a couple, being able to like come back to something like, what competency does it seem like this is most about? Or what are the values of coaching? Whether that be the definition of coaching or the core values that the code of ethics is based on. And then if that doesn't even help, I like your rule of thumb, Susan, of if there's 2 that are similar and 1 that is different, maybe choose the one that's different as just a permission to have a way to make a decision if you're not sure. Because the more we like wrestle with it, the more brain energy we're using up. And at a certain point, I think when really unsure, it's much better to just choose something and move on than to spend the energy thinking about it, because also we're then likely to overthink.
All right. Well, if you'd like to have some additional resources, and especially in the neuroscience tied to coaching, do visit our website, theacademies.com. We'd be happy to engage on LinkedIn and through the YouTube channel and any other way that you'd like to reach out to us. We welcome connection and community if this feels like it's been a resonant time together.
Thanks for watching. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Bye-bye.